Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to our video lecture series. Today is Tuesday. We are going to be focusing on a few things today. One, we are going to be talking about what President Kennedy did in some developing countries and what his plan was for different areas of the world that we would classify as like third world countries. We're also going to discuss the assassination today of President Kennedy, a national tragedy that unfolded. Some of the conspiracies behind President Kennedy's assassination, and then we're going to move into the Great Society and Lyndon B. Johnson, and kind of looking at the liberal as well as the conservative response to who would be next. What was going to happen after President Kennedy, because it's a time in American history and American society that there's a lot of unknowns. We have to date all the way back to Lincoln to have this national tragedy unfold of an assassination of someone of this magnitude, someone that was this loved by people throughout the United States. Real quick, before we get started, I want to remind you guys, you do have a quiz tomorrow over your Part 1 vocab, so make sure you're getting that completed. Hopefully you guys have finished your source activity for this unit, that Cuban Missile Crisis, and get it turned into me. We had that yesterday. If you haven't gotten it done now, make sure you're getting it done today. Continue through your reading questions. I would finish up Part 1, list your vocab, start on Part 2, because your test on that, or your quiz on that, will be on Friday. All right. Tomorrow you guys will have a quick write in your quiz, so everything will be on Canvas. If you have any questions, make sure you're emailing me or adding them to the discussion board. All right. Today we also have on Tuesday a Canvas conference from 9 to 10. So if you have any questions, you want to stop in and say hi, or ask anything about the early 1960s and Kennedy's presidency, go ahead. All right. I'll be on there. Just make sure you say hi when you jump on, so I know you're on there, and then we can start talking. All right. So let's go ahead and get into this Part 1 of our video lecture for Day 3, okay? And we're going to talk about aiding development in foreign countries, all right? Because this is really important to Kennedy, was how can we help countries that are underdeveloped or third world countries or developing countries and make them American, make them democratic? How can we get them onto our side? And it's all through the efforts and actions that we do to help establish these countries. So Kennedy was deeply concerned about the spread of communism to developing countries. That's the whole containment theory, right? We look at developing countries as countries that can be easily influenced, and communism can come in, and they can spread their ideals, and it can latch on, and it can grow, and people will then start to tend to move towards communism instead of democracy. So what can we do to go in and help? Because it's not just giving money. If we give money, but we give money to the wrong person, a dictator, and they don't use it right, then democracy is not working. So what can we do to actually physically help these people and show them that democracy is the right way to go? Because they were poor and less industrialized than wealthy developed countries, Kennedy issued an executive order creating this group called the Peace Corps. You guys may have heard of the Peace Corps. You may know people who have been in the Peace Corps. All right? The Peace Corps does a lot of different things. This new government agency sent thousands of men and women to developing nations to support local communities. How did they help these local communities? Well, they were into education, so they were teachers that would go down and help start educating the youth, educating adults, teaching people how to read, write, do math, basic fundamental educational skills, help build schools, all right? So implementation of public education in these areas. Farming. Agriculture is a huge thing in developing countries. What are some better techniques that they could be using to help their farming practices to make sure that they aren't struggling or having bad harvests? And also healthcare, doctors. A lot of doctors are in the Peace Corps, and they go and they treat patients. They help give vaccines. They also help and go to these areas and treat children, dentists, and things like that, because personal hygiene will help in the life expectancy of people in these countries, and will give them a better quality of life. So, you see a lot of teachers that join the Peace Corps after college because it gives them valuable experience, as well as a lot of medical students that will join the Peace Corps. Kennedy also launched an aid program for Latin America called the Alliance for Progress. And you have to think back to, because of the Bay of Pigs invasion and this bad rap that Latin America has given Kennedy, he wants to make sure that he specifically reaches out to this community of people, this group of nations, to show that the United States isn't just going to try and take over their country. All right, that's not who we are. We're not this big bad bully. But we're here to actually help. And this alliance he wants to create between the United States and Latin American countries to show that we're in this all together and we're going to help each other out. He's not looking for anything from them, but it's more, what can the United States do for you to help you and your country and establish you in a democratic manner? Because that's the most important thing. That's the bottom line. With the Peace Corps, with everything, we want to show that democracy is the one here helping you and not communism. All right? It's a democratic program, not a communist program that's coming to help you. And the reason why we can do this over communist countries is because the wealth in the United States compared to the wealth in the Soviet Union allows us to finance these Peace Corps and these groups and these industries to go to these countries. All right? Now, turning to something that, obviously is something that was very unexpected. The national tragedy that unfolds in Dallas, Texas, all right, which is the Kennedy assassination. In late November 1963, President Kennedy and his First Lady traveled to Texas. This was part of their campaign stop. They were meeting the governor of Texas, and they were going around and they were touring the great state of Texas, helping campaign for the upcoming election. Usually you start 2 years before. We saw this with President Trump. And you start campaigning to help get your base, and you certainly get your message out of what your next presidential term is going to be. Texas was a huge state because, as we talked about, the South was starting to transition from being Southern Democrats to now being Republicans. And since Kennedy is a Democrat, he wants to make sure that Texas stays Southern Democrats that will vote for him in the upcoming election. Now, he has a little bit of help because his vice president is from Texas, Lyndon B. Johnson. So a lot of people in Texas like Johnson, so that should help secure the vote in Texas for Kennedy. When's the last time you've seen a Democrat win the state of Texas? It's been a long time, all right? On November 22nd, the president's motorcade took the president past the Texas School Book Depository. And obviously, this is when everything starts to unfold with the assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald, a worker in the building, stood waiting on the 6th floor. He fired 3 times. His first shot missed. His next 2 shots hit JFK in the head and in the neck. The one that actually hit him in the neck traveled through his neck, actually hit the governor of Texas. He was wounded, did not die. But obviously, you can actually see the film footage still today of the assassination. The motorcade that the president in was an open-air motorcade, so he could wave to the people. People could see him, so it was a convertible car that he's sitting in. Here, the first shot, second shot, third shot, all in succession. You see Secret Service running, jumping on top of the president. Jacqueline Kennedy sitting there next to her husband, and she looks down, and she's got blood and stuff all over her, and she's pretty much holding his drooped head in her hands. And so the motorcade then speeds off and takes President Kennedy immediately to a hospital. At 1 p.m., they declared President Kennedy dead. Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the vice president, was sworn in as the 36th president of the United States on Air Force One. So before Air Force One even left Texas, Lyndon B. Johnson is sworn in because we need an acting president. We can't go without having someone as the commander-in-chief, because if this was done by a foreign country and we need the military to be activated, we need the president to do this. Now, there's an iconic image of this, and it's on the next slide, and we're going to look at it. But Mrs. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy, is the one actually holding the Bible for LBJ. And we're hours after her husband's been pronounced dead, and she's witnessed his execution in front of her. So this kind of shows you the strength of our First Lady and how important she understood the role of the presidency was, and showing how strong our country was in this time of tragedy. A local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby jumped out of the crowd and fired at Lee Harvey Oswald and murdered him as he was being transported to jail. So this is where the conspiracies start. What actually happened, because we don't actually get to hear the story from Lee Harvey Oswald because he's murdered by Jack Ruby. JFK is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, where Kennedy's brother and wife lit an eternal gas flame at his grave that continually burns. His wife Jacqueline is now buried with him. His son is now buried with him, who died tragically in a plane crash. And so that's kind of the curse of the Kennedys. Every Kennedy seems something happens to them, whether it's to them directly or their family members. There's always some sort of tragic accident. But when you guys went to Washington, D.C., if you went to Washington, D.C., and you went to Arlington National Cemetery, you probably saw this eternal flame. It's like a bowl, a flame coming out of the ground that's a gas flame, so it won't go out. It was lit on that day and will forever continue to burn. So you look at the two images on the next slide. You see LBJ. You see Jacqueline Kennedy standing there right next to his side as he's being sworn in as President of the United States. Then you see the iconic scene of the processional of President Kennedy through Pennsylvania Avenue from his wake, which was at the U.S. Congress, past the White House to Arlington National Cemetery. You see his wife with the black veil on. You see his daughter and then his son, Jack Jr., saluting his father, who was a military veteran. So, not only was he president, but he was also a military veteran, hence why Arlington National Cemetery is his place of rest. So, questions and conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination. Kennedy's assassination raised many unanswered questions. One, had Oswald worked alone? Was he part of some other faction? Was he part of some group? Was he a single shooter? This is something that's still debated today. Or was he part of a larger conspiracy to murder the president? Why did Ruby murder him? So there's so many things that happen within this 12-hour window that we don't have answers to. We're never going to have answers to, because the people that are there are no longer living. Lee Harvey Oswald can't answer these questions. Jack Ruby, who then later is killed in prison, can't answer these questions. And obviously, we only get so much information from the day, from the film, from the events, because it's not instantaneous. It's not like today. Today there'd be more vantage points. There'd be more news media coverage of the event. And so there's just a lot of stuff that's lost. Oswald was known communist sympathizer and a backer of Castro. He lived 3 years in the Soviet Union, so we do see strong ties with Lee Harvey Oswald to the Soviet Union. His wife, he actually met in the Soviet Union and brought her to the United States. She was detained for a short time because of her communist ties, her past ties to the Soviet Union. President Johnson created a special commission to investigate the assassination. It is known as the Warren Commission because it is headed by our Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren. They concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald worked alone, that this wasn't a larger plan. It was something that was driven by him, and he thought that this would help inspire the Soviet movement in the United States and inspire the Soviet Union to act against the United States. But there was nothing coming from the Soviet Union that told Lee Harvey Oswald to actually do this. Some still believe today that the FBI, CIA, or organized crime or secret agents are to blame. The organized crime aspect, because a lot of people think that the mob helped Kennedy get into his place of power, and then he had some restrictions against the mob when he was president. And obviously, Jack Ruby had ties to organized crime. And so why would someone that has ties to organized crime then execute the person that executed the president? So there's a lot of questions, but what the government said and what we believe is that Lee Harvey Oswald did this on his own. All right? So now that kind of ends the Kennedy presidency. And part two, which we're going to start here in a second, is going to talk about what's LBJ going to do and what are the two viewpoints on what's going to happen next. So stay tuned for part two of our lecture for day 3, coming up here in a second.